when I go away, I check in every couple of days with the headlines coming out of South Africa, and it's weird how nothing much seems to happen when you're not monitoring South Africa on a sort of hour by hour or minute by minute basis, as I do when I am in the country. When you're monitoring it every couple of days from overseas, all of a sudden nothing much seems to happen. And then I do a crash course when I get home and read as much as I can of what has been published on news websites in the time that I was away. And one story that was published while I was away that I went, really? Okay, why? Was one where I read that the Justice Minister, Mameloko Kubai, has paused plans to make the NSRO, that's the sex offenders, National Registry of Sex Offenders, has paused plans to make that registry public, citing legal and privacy concerns. And it is one of those things where maybe the law is correct, but it seems to deviate from common sense. And you scratch your head and say, why shouldn't I have access to information about who is a convicted, not an alleged, but a convicted sex offender? That information might be useful to me. Why shouldn't I have access to it? Lisa Vetten is with the Wits Southern Centre for Studies, a research associate there. Lisa, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, John.
Are there sound reasons to pause making the registry public?
Yes, I mean, I think you already touched on some of them. There are legal issues that do have to be thought about first and resolved before you can go ahead and just willy-nilly make this information freely available. I mean, I think there's sometimes a perception that, by not making this register public, somehow convicted sex offenders are being given special treatment and are being shielded from the consequences of their actions. And that's really incorrect. All that's happening is that they're enjoying the same protections that any other person who has been convicted of a crime enjoys, which is that once you have served your sentence, it's assumed that you should now be integrated into society and get on with your life. I think the other thing one must also emphasize is that already there are particular employment groupings who must, by law, check whether or not their employees are on not only the sex offenders register, but the child protection register, because that's really what the purpose of these two registers are, is to ensure that those who work with children, have access to children or people with disabilities are vetted beforehand in order to check that they are suitable to be placed in positions of responsibility over those categories of people.
Okay, so if I'm in a position where I'm guiding an employment process for applications for a job that involves working with children, I then do have legitimate access to the registry.
Well, what happens is that your prospective employer is required to write to both the Department of Social Development and the Department of Justice to say, here are my prospective or current employees, are any of them on the sex offenders register? And both departments are supposed to write back and say yes or no. And obviously, if they are, you may not employ them. The problem, of course, is how these registers are being administered. I mean, we've been working with organizations in Gauteng who submitted such applications in November of 2023. They still don't know where their prospective employees and current employees stand. So there are many administrative problems in this list that need to be sorted out first before you can even begin to think that something like the register is a priority.
Okay, I want to get back to that, but if there is a discussion, if I'm part of a suburban or a sort of local community connectivity group on WhatsApp or Facebook or whatever the case may be, and there is a rumor that the person who's moved into number 28 Smith Road might be a convicted sex offender, and there are a lot of young children in the neighborhood, and there's a park where young children go to play, I do not have access. I'm not able to write to anybody and find out whether the rumor on the community group is correct.
No, you're not.
And is that correct, that I should not be able to?
That's, I think, some of the questions that do need to be thought through very carefully. Because I think one of the concerns that people have is exactly this point you make about rumor. And what it is that people do with this information. And we've seen in countries overseas where it is public, some very unpleasant consequences can and do happen. So I think the question that has to be thought through first And this is why you need a legislative process, is what is it that people are going to be entitled to do with this information? Can you, for example, round up all your friends, go to the park, beat up the individual concerned, chase him away and say he must never come back and darken his doors? I mean, we already have examples of this happening in, I don't know if you're aware of the pedo hunter videos that circulate in the US, Europe and Australia, where people do exactly this. They live stream themselves beating up pedophiles or suggested that are pedophiles, put this out on the internet and make a nice sum of money because these things tend to go viral. So that's the one thing we need to ask ourselves, is that a desirable outcome? Are you also allowed to deny somebody access to property? Are they not allowed to rent from you, for example? So I think there are a whole lot of things that we must think about, which we need to think about quite carefully, because South Africa also has a policy of reintegrating offenders into society. And quite clearly, if you have those kinds of outcomes, integration isn't really happening. The other question we also should be asking ourselves is, what does this tell us about our concerns about the quality of rehabilitation being offered in prison? Is it effective if we are still fearful of people when they come out of prison? And do we think that the parole board is making the right decisions to release people? These questions should all be answered long before we even get to questions about making this public. And they're urgent because we've just seen the situation, I think, with Alison Botha, for example, who people may remember was very brutally raped and left for dead. Those two men were released on parole despite a psychologist saying they are not suitable. They have not been rehabilitated. Nonetheless, the parole board still overruled that decision. So I think all these other safeguards and questions about our systems need to be put in place first. And we shouldn't use a public access to a register as a way to excuse the scrutiny and failure of systems that are supposed to ensure that people are rehabilitated in prison and we are safe as a result.
I think there is a general feeling that sex offenders are more likely to reoffend than other offenders, and the levels of general recidivism, return to crime, partly because of failed rehabilitation and partly because of lack of opportunity for supposedly rehabilitated ex-prisoners. Levels are very high in South Africa and even higher for sex offenders everywhere around the world. I think that feeds into people's concerns around this issue.
Yes, but I must say, if you look at South Africa, the research that has been done in South Africa, and I have been part of it, there is actually no evidence to suggest that and here we looked at cases of dockets where the police were investigating matters. There isn't a suggestion that there is a very high recidivism rate among sex offenders. We found in our research that of those cases where the police actually arrested an offender, exactly 5% had previous convictions for rape. It would, in fact, the bigger group the bigger group to fear, and those who had a great, were those who had previous convictions for housebreaking, theft, hijacking, and even murder in some instances. So where you had 1 in 20 of those arrested having previous convictions for rape, you had almost 1 in 8 arrested having previous convictions for those other crimes. So I think there is a popular assumption that is not borne out by evidence.
To get back to a point you raised, earlier, Lisa, the poor state of the management of the registry, which exists, and now close to 2 years that a group has been waiting for an answer to a question about certain individuals. Are they on the register or not? Is that just part of the general dysfunction of government that one experiences in every area of government? Is it particularly worse there? Are there perhaps signs that it is getting better and it might well soon be at a point where, if you are in a position where you are hiring people who are going to work with young children, you're able to fire off an email to the responsible department registry management and say, these are our chosen candidates. Are any of them on the registry? Are we close to a situation where that might be the case?
Hard to say, but I want to shift the conversation to where we can see a very clear area of worsening in the performance of the criminal justice system, and say that we must shift our attention onto that as a matter of urgency.
And that is?
And that is a declining number of rape cases that are being put down for trial and as a consequence resulting in convictions. If you look at the Department of Justice's own data, and we look at 2013-14, when they seem to be doing their best We are now, a decade later, putting 3,000 fewer rape cases down for trial. That's very concerning. What is happening in the criminal justice system? And if you look at the number of convictions that were accomplished in the 2023-24 financial year, which was just under 4,000, that's about 1,800 less than we were achieving a decade ago. So we can see a decline in performance, and we are not urgently asking the questions to say what is going on here, what needs to be done in order to address this. Because a conviction comes right at the end of the process, and if you are not doing it, and if you are not putting cases down for trial and convicting where that is the appropriate outcome, then actually you're not putting the people. You're losing out a whole lot of people who should, in theory, end up on a sex offenders register.
Lisa, thank you very much. As always, learn a lot when I talk to you. Lisa is a research associate at the Wits University Southern Centre for Studies. And one response on the WhatsApp from Nate: I don't know much about the law with regard to this. If someone is a convicted sex offender, can't a member of the public find that information from the courts? I'm not an expert on this at all, but certain judgments are regarded as reportable judgments. And those judgments then do get reported and lodge in a database where they can be found if searched for. But the vast majority of cases are not designated as reportable cases, so are not findable in the way that I think you are suggesting.